Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talent Gap Fireside Chat, where we discuss causes of and solutions to the talent gap. I'm your host, Pete Strauss, and joining me today is Paul Bruni. Paul, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being here, Paul. Could you give our audience just a little background on yourself and how you came to be where you are today, professionally speaking?
Sure. As a kid, I liked playing computer games. I was like 7 or 8 years old, got a Atari 800 XL computer you hook up to a CRT, and it was right around the time the 386 chips were coming out, and I was told, if you can learn how to program something, I'll buy you a computer. And it was a gambit. My parents thought they'd win, and so I wrote a program that rolled some dice or something, and I got a computer. And I went to college after high school to be a computer science major. And college wasn't for me, so I joined the military. I did a career in doing multiple sysadmin roles and all kinds of technologies and networking and Unix and Windows and circuit management, and did all of that until about 2012. I got the opportunity to go into cyberspace operations, where it wasn't maintaining things, but it was actively defending, actively attacking. Got picked up to go to training for the NSA, went through rigorous operator training there. Did that for about 6.5, 7 years. Got picked up to run the Air Force's training unit that recruited and vetted and got everybody through there, and was pretty successful on getting a nice cohort of operators through, and helped design training courses for United States Cyber Command and all that. And I retired in 2020, right at the beginning of the pandemic, of course, and said, well, I want to go into the civilian sector. I want to try and change the world and make the civilian space a safer place, because the military, with unlimited budgets and no constraints, can do whatever they want. And, I started as a consultant doing digital forensics incident response, DFIR, and I did a startup for a little while, trying to do some open source intelligence stuff. Then ended up going back into consulting, in about 3 years, I went from consultant to director of an entire professional services organization with GRCA, offensive security offerings, DFIR, all that. And so pretty good understanding of the technologies, pretty good understanding of the spaces, pretty broad all the way across, and pretty good understanding of how the bad guys like to think in cybersecurity. I was one. So yes, 200 countries out there. I'm probably an APT, right? So, I think that my passion is serving that higher purpose of trying to protect vulnerable people, right? And cybersecurity happens to be my skill set, so that's where I apply it. And that's how I got where I am today professionally.
Awesome. So have you been responsible for hiring and recruiting,
Absolutely.
managing people in your last couple of roles?
Yeah. So my last couple of roles in professional services, I was the hiring manager for the team. Luckily we didn't have a lot of turnover, but I did have to fill several positions, and got to go through that whole writing job descriptions, vetting resumes, talking to recruiters, the whole gamut, right? And now, I'm going off into entrepreneurial world with a startup, and so I'm having to do the same thing again for other types of roles like front end web development. Some of the stuff that is a little bit broader in scope for the technology space. So I've had to do a lot of sourcing talent, evaluating talent. And, I think for me, it's a balance of skills, and it's a balance of personality and culture fit and all of the other things, because, just having taken a bunch of sysadmin courses really isn't enough to sit down and be able to be effective in a cybersecurity role, especially customer facing.
Awesome. So I hear a lot about biases in hiring processes, and we hear a lot about culture fit is like a criterion for hiring people. How do you ensure that you're not succumbing to any underlying biases that you might have in trying to assess culture fit in how somebody fits in your team?
Well, I think the most important thing really is knowing that you have biases. Um, Unconscious bias is a monster. And by, examining your own thought processes, your own procedures, having controls, I think is a really good way to say, okay, I understand that these biases exist. I understand that these are things that I have to consciously make sure that I'm addressing by not doing them, right? And then having peer review of, kind of your decision making thought processes, and uh, because my biases are different than everyone else's, right? So I think that's important. And then in terms of establishing culture fit, for me, I think effective teams have similar values, and they have similar um, approaches to the world, not their work necessarily. So I think if you can distill down in your hiring process a way to tease out those things um, in a way that doesn't, you know, affect any DEI sort of things, tell me about a time you failed and how you overcame it, just to see how someone approaches problems and whether they have an internal locus of control versus an external locus of control. Those sort of attitude, personality driven culture questions um, that I think is a good way to remove the bias from the actual hiring process, but in attracting talent, in selecting talent. I've seen companies that they make sure that they bring in at least one candidate that doesn't that doesn't fit the white male cybersecurity kind of mold, because and we had the same problem in the military where we had all these cyber operators and there was one female, right? And there were no institutional barriers for that. It was a very equal opportunity environment, but if you have a shortage of personnel and you look around the room and everybody looks the same, you're missing out on a large population of talented individuals with a lot of potential and a lot of ability. And I think you have to deliberately take steps to get those people brought into the fold, because due to cultural barriers that go all the way back to middle school or childhood, if you come from a culture that doesn't value technology, and it's a blue collar value type environment, or if you come from um, the story that the one woman that I worked with at the Air Force, she said when she was in 8th grade, her math teacher told her when she was struggling on a math problem, she didn't need to be good at math because um, she was a girl. Now
That's
she
unfortunate.
saw that as a challenge and overcame it.
Mhm.
But so I went to hiring events and specifically found good IT professionals that were females and said, "Have you ever thought about going into operations?" And there's not a lot of women in that. But you can't get diversity if you don't represent diversity, right? Because nobody wants to be a square peg in an organization. So you have to have diversity in order to attract diversity, and it's not just about the whatever political agenda or whatever. It's purely about making sure that you have the best talent in the seats, and to do that, you want to have your aperture as wide as possible, um, and understanding that as you go through, that everyone brings value, everyone, regardless of whatever they have going on in their life with the color of their skin or their gender or whatever. um, I think those biases fall away. That was a very long answer to a very short question, but I'm pretty passionate about, in order to achieve what we need to achieve, we need the best people doing it, and every individual has their own capabilities. So in order to get after the thing that we're trying to do here, we have to be able to make sure everyone's included. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. I picked up on one thing that you said that was kind of like basically establishing checks and balances in the hiring process, having other people check to make sure that you're not just ignoring somebody for something inconsequential that really doesn't apply to the actual job.
Sure.
It could be something inherent that you're not really aware of. And like you said, just being aware of those biases. But yeah, I totally agree that we need to, as an industry, widen the aperture as widely as we possibly can, just to encompass all the available talent out there. Sometimes that may be from, non-traditional, non-tech backgrounds, especially for GRC roles.
Yeah.
We hear a lot about a talent shortage or talent gap. But I do think the idea of the ideal candidate, especially for certain jobs like SOC analyst, it's very, very narrow. And there's certain hard requirements, skill sets, technical abilities that are always mentioned. And the soft skills are something a little bit tougher to measure, but just as important, and critical thinking ability and ability to analyze a problem and think outside the box versus just following rote procedures and stuff like that. How do you kind of assess some of those intangibles that you're looking for?
So, I think what you look for is you look for people who know how to learn. And you look for transferable skills. I've having done training development before, there's the KSA model, and it's the best way, I think, to build skill matrices in your organization as well, where you say, okay, what knowledge, skills, and abilities are required, right? And if you really dig down into that, knowledge and skills for things even like a SOC analyst, right? You're going to need to know network security principles. You're going to need to know networking principles. You're going to need to know adversary TTP stuff, right? Like there's a lot of that kind of thing. But if you look at the ability angle of that, I think too many people hire on KS and forget about A. But if you find somebody who is like, I got 3 master's degrees, and one's in philosophy, one's in math, and one's in history. Well, that person, and they did it in like 4 years. You're like, well, that person probably knows how to learn, right? Mm-hmm. And I can teach you skills. I can teach you knowledge, right? But your ability to learn that fast, I'd hire that person in a heartbeat if they want to be an entry level, because I know in 6 months they're going to know everything there is to know about. That was kind of an extreme example, but at the same time, there are people who are career pivoting right now that have credentials in education, have credentials in some of these other things. And I think looking at the transferable skills, looking at someone's drive and passion and ability to learn, especially for quote unquote entry level cybersecurity jobs, I think there's a lot of potential there. I hired a person onto my DFIR team that had never done DFIR, but they were, the director of all cyber operations for European theater for United States Cyber, right? Like they were doing tool reviews, they were doing mission reviews, all of these things, right? And so they spoke in front of Congress, right? And so I'm like, well, if they can speak in front of Congress, they can probably talk to a client. If they can handle the pressure of that environment, they can probably be able to not lose their cool in an engagement where somebody's having problems and they're flustered, right? And if they understand adversary TTPs and they understand how that works, they can probably find them. I can teach them how to use Axiom or Xways or whatever tool DFIR uses, but you can't teach people to think, right?
That's so.
Yeah. And within 6 months, he had the best profit margins on the team, in terms of the ROI for that. People second guessed my thoughts on that one too. They were like, I don't think you should hire him because he's never done this before. And I was like, I don't care if he's done it before. I know he can do it. And if you look at somebody who's done it for 4 years, it doesn't tell you if they're any good at it, right? So, I think assessing, potential and ceiling and kind of calculating the learning curve to see, am I going to get an A player in this space, and are they going to be able to be highly effective in the relatively near term? I think that's perfectly acceptable approach to hiring, especially when you're talking about people. The narrow focus that exists right now, and you can probably speak to it more than I can. I don't know if it's driven by keyword searches and automation, or if it's driven by, or if it's just driven by, HR and job descriptions and how those are written, or what. But I think a lot of really highly skilled candidates that would be really amazing at a job aren't getting an opportunity to break into the field just because they're being dismissed.
Yeah, I agree. What I see most often, and it's something I can go up on a soapbox about for pretty long probably. It seems every company out there wants to hire from a competitor, and hiring in security has always kind of been a zero-sum game. The thought is, okay, well, if we hire somebody from a direct competitor, they're going to know exactly the type of work that they're going to be doing here. They're going to have done it before, and they're just going to be, kind of plug and play. What they kind of neglect in that equation, as you had mentioned, is, if somebody's done a job for 4 years, you have no idea if they're actually good at it or not. And that's something that's really frustrated me for a very long time. Ever since I've been in recruiting, I've always heard from hiring teams, we need somebody with 5 years of SOC 2 audit experience, or pen testing experience with 2 years in consulting. But that really doesn't tell you anything about their ability to do those things. That's why I think that there have to be better ways to ask those questions and assess ability in those areas than just how long have you done it. I think I'm a good example of this. I was 1.5 years into recruiting, and I was outperforming people that had been doing it for 5-10 years. And I basically taught myself all the security terminology, didn't have anybody to mentor me. And when I came on board at the first company I broke into security back in 2014, I was making an impact in the second week. I was getting people hired. And that's not something that, you would know by looking at 1.5 years of recruiting experience. You'd think, well, this guy's junior, or at least most hiring managers would. So I've been a big advocate for a lot of candidates that don't fit that years of experience mold. And, I think you're a perfect example of that, since we worked together at one point. But, I've advocated for a lot of different folks that just in talking to them, I know they have those soft skills. They have that drive and ambition that just can't be taught. But you have to give people a chance and not just, write people off based on a resume, which, by the way, most people suck at writing resumes. And so, as a recruiter, I spent a lot of time going through a lot of resumes. A lot of times I have to kind of read between the lines for the information that isn't there versus what is physically in front of my face. I think that's a big differentiator between a good recruiter and a great recruiter. Is the great recruiter can kind of recognize patterns and read between the lines. It's, again, a lot of intangibles versus just recognizing a certain keyword on a page, but understanding how that keyword relates to other words in the field and how it might be related to another set of tools or something like that. It's.
I saw a post the other day. Somebody said that they passed on a candidate because they were trying to go into like oil and gas. And they had said that they had worked with crude fluids, but the hiring manager was looking for someone who had worked with crude oil. It's like, you have to be, like you said, you have to be able to look at the person and say, no, well, I mean, that's kind of the same thing. And be able to advocate to the hiring manager and be like, well, it's probably the same thing.
Yeah. So I think too, then, that kind of brings up a good point that your hiring efforts are really only as good as the recruiters on the front end. If they're just looking for that specific word and there's something related, it's almost the same thing and it's a synonym, but they don't even pick up on that. They could be screening people out that would be a fit for your team, which I guess brings up another point in that I think hiring managers should be closer to their recruiters and their HR people than sometimes they are. I know that the pushback on that is going to be, well, we only have so much time in a day and stuff like that. But I generally kind of look at it as, okay, if you spend, call it an hour with the recruiting and HR team at the beginning of a search for a candidate, you're going to save so much time on the back end, not having to interview people that are just not fits for what you're looking for. If you can sit down with the recruiters and explain not just the keywords they're looking for, but related keywords, what companies they might come from, intangibles that you're looking for. So when they do their screen, they can actually screen for that stuff. So
Right.
not making it to you if they don't meet those things, and then boom, you've freed up 4 hours a week for 4 interviews that you normally wouldn't have had, and you only interviewed the one. That makes sense.
And I think you could even take it to the next step, right? If your screening process is ineffective and you miss out on a great candidate because you had you posted the job on LinkedIn and you got 1,200 applications, right? Probably 600 of those are not even close, right? And then but going through that many is a real endeavor, right? Which is where recruiters come in, because they can do a lot of that pre-screening work for you. But if you don't miss, because you do look between the lines and you do value some of the other things that would be culture fit, ceiling, I think is important. Like, where is this person capable of getting to in 3 years, 5 years? If you can hire someone onto your team that's effective for the position you're trying to fill, that's great, and it lasts you a little while. But if you can hire somebody who's going to be a fit and going to stay at your organization and provide value for years, the time you save isn't just in the beginning, sitting down with the recruiter for an hour, or even if you sat down with a recruiter for 4 hours. Replacing someone in an organization because they leave or because you have to let them go, because they weren't a good fit, and then you have to rehire. The lost time and revenue that is involved with that versus putting in the time up front is amazing, right? Having to backfill a position or upgrade a position it takes weeks, and it takes effort. In the whole time, your company's not making as much money as they could, because you don't have the right person in the seat, or you don't have any person in the seat. Whereas on the front end, if you had widened the aperture, entertained more applicants, you might have found somebody that was going to be there for 3, 5, 7 years, was going to be able to effectively come in and not just excel in their role, but make the people around them better. Have complementary skills and raise the entire capability of the team. I don't care if you spent 40 hours, if you spent an entire week doing nothing but working with the recruiter and HR and reviewing candidates, that's going to pay off in 6 months or 9 months, right? If you find the absolute best candidate.
Mm-hmm. Yep, makes perfect sense. Yeah, and I guess I'm thinking of specific examples of what that would look like to a recruiter. So we, like you mentioned, somebody in an internal recruiting role somewhere, they may have 1,200 applicants to a single job posting. They need to go through all of those, and the old statistic, I guess, is that we spend 5 to 10 seconds looking at any given resume, just quickly scanning it for what we're looking for. So what is a recruiter looking for then in those 5 to 10 seconds to highlight those intangibles when they have 1,200 applicants? I would think of things like, are they involved in a bunch of clubs? Are they involved in industry associations, ISSA, IC squared? Are they do they have courses listed? Or they get certifications? Not necessarily mattering what the certification is, but just the fact that they're going after something. Like you said, if they have multiple degrees, if they're able to show relevant extracurriculars, stuff like that. Just looking for, I guess, motivation and passion as best you can. I know sometimes that's tough to see on a resume, but
and I think it's hard to get onto a resume, right? Because as you're sitting here talking, I'm thinking about my resume, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm one of those candidates that like, okay, well, if I can get to the interviews, I'm going to be all right. But, um, thinking critically and self-reflecting a little bit on my resume, I think there's on the candidate side, right? I think there's this huge misunderstanding about what to put on there, maybe in that context, because it's all focused on accomplishments and impact, and it's focused on skills, right? But I think people probably don't weight some of that other stuff enough, um, and certainly probably don't put it onto the resume in such a way that it stands out and tells the story. Um, I've been struggling with this internally. How do you tell the story of who you are on a resume? You can tell the story of what you've done and what you know, but how do you tell the story of who you are, right? And because I think personhood is very important in placing talent. Um, because everyone has like these different things, and I could have two people with exactly the same resumes, and they're going to come into my organization fit very differently. And so how do you screen that up front? I think that's a hard problem. I think that's a hard problem, because you don't have time to dissect every resume and spend 10 minutes on it. You don't have time to call every candidate, talk to them for half an hour. So and then how do you evangelize and communicate that to the candidates widely to say get better, right? You said yourself, the resumes you get still today in 2023 are not good, when a Google search will give you 10 things that say this is how you make a resume good. There's other tools out there to help with your wording and help with how to do things. There's other resources and community groups to say, hey, can you review this and give me advice? Recruiters will do it too. So how do you tell the story of who you are, and your ability? Like I've never done I've never done a SIS-18 gap assessment myself personally, but I've done tons of QA. I've done tons of STIG reviews in the military. I've done some NIST stuff. So how do I tell the story that, yeah, I might not know the specific framework, but it's only going to take me like a weekend to translate it and be able to just go out and deliver, right? And how does the average candidate do that? How do they highlight the transferable skills and who they are as a person and their ability to apply those and learn? I think that's a hard problem. Probably not one we're going to solve today.
Yeah. Well, my partial solution, I guess, is, say you have 1,200 applicants for a given posting. I think it needs to come from the employer side, from the hiring side versus the candidate side. The candidates are already getting a ton of conflicting information and advice about, this is what your resume should look like. Some people that are professional resume writers, they're putting text boxes and tables and stuff in people's resume. But me as a recruiter, I know that when an applicant tracking system tries to parse all that stuff, it messes up the formatting. So as somebody who actually looks at resumes all day, I would say that's a terrible thing to do. And people are getting, paid to give people this bad advice. And that's rampant. So I think the recruiters need to be trained better on the hiring side. I think they need to be a little bit more open-minded. And I think in a lot of cases, they're less open-minded than they could be because of the hiring team. The hiring team has a very narrow view of what that person's going to look like on paper. And so the recruiters are basically just taking orders, which I think is not something that a lot of people realize. They kind of badmouth the recruiters when ultimately they're just kind of carrying out the orders that they're given. Having
gotten to know a bunch of recruiters, I think, I think there's three broad buckets. I think there's the bucket of I am passionate about what it is I'm doing, and I care about getting candidates placed, and I will kill myself and work a million hours to make sure I'm doing everything I can for the people that are trying to find jobs. And then I think there's the other end of the spectrum that is high placement, high turnover, get as many placements as possible, and treat it and treat it very much like transactional. And then I think there's like this middle ground of people who talk to candidates, talk to hiring managers, try to marry up the two kind of, what are you actually looking for versus, what did the job posting say that you sent me, right? Because there's disconnects all the time between the hiring manager and HR and a job posting. I mean, I was in a relatively small organization, and I couldn't even get my job posting through HR to say what I wanted to hire because HR had their own constraints, right? That you get things back from HR, like, well, if you put that on there, then the title doesn't match. Well, no, I mean, it does. You just don't know how we implement that, right? There's those internal problems, but then it takes a skilled liaison, right, to be able to say, I want to still make money as a recruiter. I don't want it to work 80 hours a week and not make money, right? So I have to have some sort of placement turnover, in order to get people in and make money. So you have to work with the companies, but then to also say, well, I know what it is they're looking for, and I know what this candidate is capable of, and then being an advocate, right? I think that's a difficult middle ground to get to, but I think there's absolutely recruiters that are in that space that do a really good job of that. I've talked to like 40 of them in the last couple of weeks for multiple reasons. Some of it has to do with kind of what I'm trying to do with my startup and approaching, addressing some training deficiencies and getting recruiter perspective. And I'll tell you, I've gotten all kinds of different responses from recruiters on how they approach that problem set. So what you're saying, 100% true, but you're in one of the three buckets. And so how do you make that the de facto standard for recruiters? I think is a more difficult conversation too. I think a lot of it's because cybersecurity is new in the scheme of things, right? People have been building cars for over 100 years. People have been manufacturing things for 150 years. People have been farming forever. So if you're looking for an agriculture person or you're in those spaces, it's easy. Cybersecurity. Somebody posted the other day, IT wasn't a thing when they started, in like 1998 or something. I was like, holy cow, you're right. Like the terminologies are new. The cybersecurity is probably only about 15 years old, really, in terms of separating it from IT support. And so there's no standardization across the industry as to what each job role does. Every organization is going to have a little bit different implementation. Some might be wildly different. Even internally, they might be different. The recruiting space is wildly different, right? And so maybe it's just going to take some time to settle all that out and kind of get to a state of normalcy. But in the meantime, you have organizations that have missions and have things that they're trying to accomplish. You have people who are trying to break into the industry to do that stuff. And you're trying to figure out how do you incubate talent, and how do you get the right people in the right jobs in the right place at the right time? I think it's a problem we need to solve sooner than later, though, right? Like, because this industry is so new and look how big it is already, it moves fast. And so we need to solve these problems. And because a lot of the old guard came over from the inception of cybersecurity, right? If you broke into it 10 years ago, it was a lot easier, right? Because nobody had experience. So you didn't have to have 5 years experience doing something in order to do something. But the population is aging in their career timeline. And I don't think that there's, we don't have apprenticeships and journeymen and craftsmen and all that stuff built. We don't have occupational training. You can't go to a trade school to learn how to be a cybersecurity analyst. Right? You can go and learn how to do networks and IT, but it's not going to teach you how to sit in a SOC. Right? So how do you, I think it's a problem we need to address relatively quickly. And how do we create a source of talent that can then be grown? And then how do we, how do organizations then grow talent internally? Because I'd much rather grow people and keep them in my company for 10, 15, 20 years than every time a position at senior level comes open, I say, well, I have to externally hire, because I didn't do any work in growing my own people. So it's difficult though, right? Because you're chasing metrics, you're chasing utilization targets in consultancy, right? You're chasing whatever internal in performance indicators at companies with internal cybersecurity functions. How do you deliberately carve out time for professional development and growth? I just don't think we're doing a good enough job yet. I don't think we can't, but the talent gap that we're seeing, especially at the junior levels, I think is largely because, it's like my mom. She doesn't understand the world the way I do, in terms of cyber, right? And I don't understand it the way my kids do. Technology evolves, and the younger people are immersed in it, right? But there's no formal way for them to shape it into, well, cybersecurity is a profession. And I think that's a difficult problem that we need to probably get on top of pretty quickly. I think CISA agrees. If you were to talk to them, I think they would tell you the same thing. I think DOL agrees, Department of Labor. They're looking at it saying, okay, cool. What happens when all these people retire or move on, or everyone's a senior or a director or an SVP, right? Like, who's doing the work? And it can't just be shuffling the same 200 people around from company to company. You have to grow a talent base at some point. So.
Yep, completely agree. And I've been on my soapbox for anybody that's seen me on LinkedIn talking about exactly that for quite some time. I think the question for me is, how, practically speaking, tangibly, do you justify as a hiring manager growing a team of juniors versus hiring one or two senior people that can do the job on day one, knowing that you're going to have sort of a lag time behind the training, and knowing that the juniors are going to take a while to ramp up. So, how would you justify that, I guess, as somebody in industry, and two, somebody who's on the consulting side, say as a director?
Yeah. So I think, there's a couple things there. Do you happen to know what the average turnover rate is for a cybersecurity function right now?
Not off the top of my head.
It's not great though.
Yeah,
it's not great.
It's probably a year-ish.
Right.
Yeah.
So the fact that that's become accepted as just the way it is, I think is part of the problem. Because no one's sitting down and doing root cause analysis and saying, why is it this way? Right. They're just like, well, you're not going to hold on to talent for too long. They're going to get smart and go on, and somebody's going to offer them a better job, and they're going to leave, and whatever. But I think some of it comes down to that, ROI that we talked about in hiring a good candidate. I think there's a lot of ROI in retaining talent. And so if I can take the time out, how do I justify it? Right? How do I justify spending that effort as opposed to going out and shopping and finding another candidate? I think if you can grow people internally, it makes people want to stay. If you can promote internally, it makes people want to stay. If you can value people through actions and not just, a mission statement on your website, and say, look, we create a culture here where we care about people, we value internal growth, we value professional growth, we value internal accession. You're going to have lower turnover, right? You're going to have more tribal knowledge of things, because you can say, well, I have this role here, in my company as a threat analyst, and I can just go hire another threat analyst. They're going to come in and know what to do. Well, I guarantee your systems, your policies, your procedures, your network is different than where they came from, and there's still a curve, right? I hired a senior DFIR consultant, and he came from a company that had some brand recognition to it, and I was like, all right, cool. He came in, he's like, this is not at all how we did it. We didn't approach anything this way, and it's like, wow, okay, are we doing it wrong? Are they doing it wrong? How can we improve things? But at the same time, there was a curve, and it was a pretty substantial. It probably took 9 months for them to transition how they approach things. And so I think if you spend the time internally to grow people, you're going to keep them around. You're not going to have that year average, right? You could have people sticking in your organization for multiple years, filling more senior roles, not being, and every time you fill a management role or a senior role, it's not just that role that takes time. It's disruptive to the team dynamics, because you have to, they have to come in and figure out how they fit, and the team has to figure out how they fit. And so if you can remove the disruptions of having to hire anew by creating a culture where people feel valued and don't want to leave, you have the side effect of now being able to justify growing your internal talent and spending some extra time on things. We had a training session every Thursday afternoon for an hour, 16 people. If you figure the average billable rate of that would be, somewhere between, let's just call it $300 an hour, 16 people. That was a $5,000 training event every Thursday afternoon by taking that hour out, right? But we had different topics. We had people coming in and sharing different aspects of the business, and how things function, and what does HR do, right? But it was that deliberate investment in people's growth. I mean, you're not getting a lot done in an hour, right? But you're sparking thought, and then they're going to go off and do independent research, and maybe they'll take a class later, because they were exposed to something cool. But that deliberate thing. And then the other thing is training budgets. Companies have training budgets for people. I don't think I've seen a job posting where, in cybersecurity, where it didn't come with some sort of, annual training budget. Being deliberate in how you manage a training program. I think a lot of people are just like, hey, I want to take this course, and somebody, stamps it, and then they go take a course. But does it provide value to the individual? Does it provide value to their career goals? Does it provide value to the organization? I don't think anybody's asking those. Very few people are asking those questions. They're not sitting down with the individual saying, okay, I see you want to take malware analysis course with SANS, but you're a GRC person. Are you looking to switch? Are you looking to broaden? Like, what is the motivation?
Question would be why?
Yeah, what are you trying to do here? And and oftentimes the training approval is probably, it might not be the first line supervisor. It might be HR, right, who manages the benefits programs, right? And they don't know the difference. So a lot of times people are taking training that's not great. But if you can sit down and say, well, here's a bunch of courses that are available. Here's a bunch of KSAs that we need for our skills and abilities and stuff for our team, and for people in different places with different, and then do an actual skills analysis of your team and see, and like, inventory things. I think you can marry up the courses that are available and the trainings that are available. I had an individual, my last job, he's like, I'm getting too old for this, Paul. I want to learn how business works, I guess. Right. And, I want to, and instead of using his training budget on, some 500 level SANS course to become super expert at DFIR, he took some leadership courses. And so, because he wanted to learn how to lead and manage teams, because he wanted to move into a leadership role in an organization and not just be a technical expert, right? So, but you need to be able to grow people like that. And some people will be able to do it independently. Other people need mentorship and guidance, right? Which is a whole other topic, not mentorship. But I think that's how an organization justifies it. I think throw out the notion that you have to turn over your employees every 18 months. You're going to have a new set of people. Start creating a culture where people feel valued, and then your return on investment will be that they're going to be more skilled, better capable of doing their job, more efficient, and better revenue generating.
Yeah, and I think retention is a lot easier than people make it out to be. I think the default is to think, oh, we gotta put a vesting period on our 401k, or we need to hold signing bonuses, and make them pay them back if they leave before a year or something like that. All that stuff, that just kind of, I feel like, almost breaks down trust. If anything, I think people that stick around, they feel valued, they feel heard. A lot of intangible stuff. Like one of the best practices that I had, because I used to be an HR manager in addition to a recruiter for a small consulting firm. One of the best practices was just I did quarterly check-ins with everybody. I would get candid feedback from every employee. I'd do 15 minutes with every employee and just see how things were going. And just that little bit of a call, scheduled, informal, and being HR and not the direct hiring managers, I would hear a lot of feedback that the hiring managers never would. If they were frustrated, if they were burned out, if they were, whatever it is, and I would have actionable feedback that I could share with the management teams and say, hey, some people are not happy about this stuff. This was a common thread in these talks. Let's figure out a way to address it. That was kind of a best practice. And just, I swear, half the people I talk to as a recruiter, everybody has their motivator for making a move. And a very common one is, I just don't feel heard at my current company.
Oh, yeah.
I have suggestions to improve things, be it process or technology or whatever, and nobody listens. And I know it would save the company money. And it's really that simple.
Well, I think there's a misunderstanding and probably a misusage of the term leadership. I think people get management and leadership confused. And retention isn't solved with management. Retention is solved with leadership. And, I'm old school, and I think the military does a really good job of this one particular thing. And I started using that in my civilian career, which was, you sit down when you have a new employee or you have a new direct report. I spent 2 to 4 hours at the beginning of that to go over all the roles and responsibilities, to go over all of their goals, to go over all of what the next step looks like. I had 16 direct reports. So I would then also, every week I had available for a one-on-one. Didn't always use it, but and when you have 16 direct reports, that's 8 hours of your week, but I just worked into the evenings, right? But I felt that was my duty to my people, to be a leader, right? And to say, hey, what's going on? What are you seeing? What do you need from me, right? How can I support you, right? Because you're the one out there making the money. How do I support you, right? And you can build trust, right? And then it's not the HR manager having to go to the hiring managers or the first line supervisors and saying, here's this common thread, because they've already heard it. Um, then the conversation is, yeah, I know that's there, but here's why we can't fix it, right? But that's a lot different than I'm hearing this and having the hiring manager or the frontline supervisor, or whoever, go, what? I thought everybody was happy, which I'm sure you got a lot. So, being connected, leading people and not just managing them, right? I had a supervisor at one point where we had weekly one-on-ones, and we get on the phone and he'd be like, your utilization was this last week, and your utilization needs to be here. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I need to know here's my problem, right? I'm overskilled for the position and I'm working too fast. So how do I get my utilization up, right? And it was just like, well, bill more hours. Like, that's not what I'm saying, right? Like, how do I approach the problem? How do I get I've never done consultancy before. I need you to teach me to be a consultant, right? Like, I need you to help grow me in that way. It never happened. So, I didn't work there very long. And so I think had someone leaned in and said, Paul, okay, I know you're capable of doing things and growing and moving ahead in the company. Let me help you navigate how to approach this role. I think I would have been super successful. The last company I was with, I was happy to have a manager that did that, right? And a lot of empowerment and a lot of guidance, but I was able to figure some stuff out pretty quick. So it's just, it's leaning in and actually trying to help your people succeed, and not just throwing their metrics at them and telling them they're not succeeding, right? Like, it's the old, I had a mass sergeant in the Air Force. He'd walk in every morning with a coffee cup and say, work more. Thanks. He said it kind of tongue in cheek, but then, looking back at it, I think he was just terrible. So, I think there needs to be more of that. And the talent gap that we're seeing, I think it's a self-inflicted wound. We expect everyone else to grow our talent for us, and then we can just go pick them up on the street. But as a community, as a profession, I think, we have to understand that it's a shared problem requiring coordinated effort.
For sure. And I guess going back to kind of the dollars and cents of it, speaking of, the justification for growing a junior team, you can use some basic metrics as far as calculating how much it's costing you in turnover. So the age-old figure is it costs 6 months of somebody's salary when they leave. So if you figure that you've put that off for a year, you've just saved half of somebody's salary multiplied by however many people you have, and then you save that much money this year. That goes a long way towards, justifying a couple of juniors versus, one senior.
And if you have to use a recruiter, you have to pay, for the recruiting service, right? And that's an additional cost. And then you also, oftentimes, if you have to replace someone, you might end up having to pay severance, right? So, I think there's a lot of really easy numbers that you can plug in and go justify things. But, in my experience and in my networks and talking to people, there doesn't seem to be a lot of appetite at the mid-management level. And again, maybe it's a lack of deliberate leadership training in the industry as well. But there doesn't seem to be a lot of appetite to go and do those sort of justifications and do those sort of things. I was working with a guy. He was a lab tech, forensic lab tech, right? Like, processing evidence. And he's like, I'm so busy. We need to hire another person, but they won't let me. And I'm like, well, what did you tell them? It's like, oh, I told them we needed to hire another person and they won't let me. I was like, well, Okay. Have you told them what hiring another person would do and what the value and what the benefit and what that is, and put it in dollars and cents terms for them? And no, that's a good idea. And then they hired another person. So I think you have the same thing with training and growth, right? It requires someone not just to sit down and do the math, but then to have the intestinal fortitude to put themselves on the line and be disruptive by going to their boss or the decision maker in their organization to say, I want to do this thing, and this is why I think it's a good idea. And potentially be told no, or um, or potentially face their own career consequences, even because you go out on a limb if you tell people, well, I want to raise everybody's salary so we can have retention, right? People can be like, oh no, this manager guy, he's scary. But in general, though, I think more people, and I think it's probably a lack of leadership at the intermediate level, and it's not any individual's fault. There's probably plenty of people who have the potential and capability of being great leaders. I think it's a system problem and an industry problem where we don't grow leadership skills.
What do you think causes that? Is there just like you said, it's a newer industry and we just don't understand how to develop people into leaders, or is it that the wrong people are being hired into managerial leadership positions? And so they might be good managers for, however you define manager, but they're not true leaders. Like, for instance, I know in sales, a common issue is that you'll hire one of your top performers to be the manager of the sales team. And what ends up happening is they're a really good individual performer, but you put them in charge of a bunch of people and they have no idea how to motivate other people. So just because they were a good individual contributor does not make them a good manager or a good leader.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily a cybersecurity problem on this one. I think there is a broad problem across all industries of promoting people for their performance in their current role and not based on their ability to do the one that you're hiring them into. When you do internal, like, well, they were my top performer, so obviously they need promoted. Well, maybe not, right? Maybe not. Maybe you're setting them up for failure, or maybe they need promoted and they're capable and they have the potential to do it, but they need to fill out the KSAs for the role that they're going into, or at least show some progress into that role, right? And but I think it goes all the way back to the beginning of our conversation about valuing people's accomplishments and impact and skills, right? And saying, well, this person has all of these skills, and then those things are seen as valuable, but we're not placing, I think, enough value on leadership. And when I say leadership, the most junior person in your organization is capable of leadership. You can lead from any place in your organization. And so I like having leaders on my team, right? I like having a team full of type A's. I love it. As long as it's constructive and as long as it's a culture fit where people can have open dialogue and constructive conversations. I think disagreement is great. But there's also, reading. I set up a book club at my last organization for all the managers and above, and dumped, my reading list of leadership books, right? I love John Maxwell. It's a plug. I don't care. I think it's the most easily digestible leadership content that's out there right now. Then there's more deep dive stuff, right? Mackenzie Edge is good. Grit by Angela Duckworth is good. There's a lot of really good books out there for professional development, leadership development, personal growth. But those things, we rely too much on the individual to do it or to know to do it. And I don't think we place enough, deliberate value on it, which leads to highly technically skilled people being put into positions of leadership without the scaffolding necessary to excel. I know we were talking about entry level talent gap, but now talking about the mid manager level talent gap. I think a lot of that's like deliberate leadership training. How many people do you know that have a mentor? that's not their organization, right? You know, I know a few. I know a whole bunch of people who say I want one, right? But you know, I think finding a mentor that's walked the path that you're trying to walk, that's not in your organization, so they don't have competing priorities or agendas, that you can sit down with once a month or once a quarter and have a conversation. You know, and as a leader in a company or an organization, again, communicating that to your team, making it part of your company, like training program, to say we encourage people to go find mentors. You know, we can do internal mentorship. However, it's okay if it's just putting it on paper, right? If you say, here's our training program, and here's the policy that here's the framework of it, and here's the, you know, the SOPs for how we do things and how we communicate. You know, there's a deliberateness to it.
And any advice or I guess encouragement for would-be mentors? Because I feel like there's a lot of people that are looking for mentors, but like you said, there's just not as many actual mentors. I get the sense that, you know, obviously everybody in security is super overworked and stressed out and stuff like that. And I don't think mentorship necessarily is a priority. How would you justify that for a would-be mentor, like to devote however many hours a week it takes to actually take somebody under their wing?
Well, I think you get mentors by having mentees. I think if people have been mentored, they understand the value, and then as they grow in their career, they want to give back and do the same thing for somebody else. Like, you know, and if you're the type of person that says, I can't take a week out of my week because I'm busy, or a week out of my quarter because I'm busy to help someone else, maybe a stranger, you're probably not going to be a good mentor anyway. So that's fine. I'm not talking to those people. But the people that are like, you know, I could probably take an hour to help somebody that needs it, if they just want it to have a sounding board that's not in their organization on how to grow in their career. You know, there's some organizations, you know, here and there, community is a practice kind of places, you know, like the Premier Group on LinkedIn, or, you know, in my case, there's like the Transitioning Military Group. You know, there's different places where there are some mentorship things. But you know, I think the other big problem specifically with cybersecurity is imposter syndrome. I think there's a lot of people who are in senior roles, but probably don't believe that they'd make a good mentor. Like, they'd love to do it, but they're afraid they're gonna like hurt somebody by giving them bad advice or something like that. My advice to those people that want to do it, that have achieved, is to put their imposter syndrome aside, put their fear aside of giving bad advice or not doing enough for someone, because if you're not doing anything, they're not getting anything. And understand that mentorship isn't me and you sitting down and me saying, Pete, what you need to do next week is you need to go out and you know, call 800 companies or whatever, right? The mentorship is saying, well, where are you struggling? What's my perspective? How can I give you anecdotal kind of stories about where I ran into similar things, how I handled it, how I could have handled it better, to stop them from having to do the same thing that you did, right? And anybody who wants to provide that value should offer to provide that value. And you could even do it publicly. You could just literally put a post on LinkedIn saying, if anybody's looking for career advice, I've done some things. Hit me up in my DMs. Thanks. You know, and next thing you know, you'll have 11 mentees.
That's a great idea. And actually, I have another idea as well. If anybody's curious, hit me up. I have a list of Discord channels, some specific to specific subdisciplines of security, like DFIR, some that are more just beginner friendly in general. But yeah, I can send you a bunch of Discord links. Some of these have sections where it says looking for mentor, looking for mentee.
Yeah.
And you can actually post on there. And usually there's dozens, if not hundreds of people chomping at the bit for the opportunity to have a mentor. So yeah,
you should automate a LinkedIn post like the first of every month. Reminder, here's some places. and just like, fire and forget that thing off in the corner and just have it post to LinkedIn for you every month. Because I think I think that's awesome, right? To have those communities.
And Reddit as well, actually. Access Cyber has a bunch of Discord channels and subreddits and stuff like that, where a lot of security professionals hang out, or would be security professionals. Because in my experience, there's thousands, if not tens of thousands of people trying to break into the industry, and they're getting, I think, sold to a lot by certification companies and degree programs and stuff like that. They're spending a lot of money, but they're not actually sitting down with the people that really truly have the inside track on, how to break into the field if you're new, or how to succeed once you've broken in. Talking to somebody who's higher level is invaluable for sure. And it doesn't take a lot of time, I don't think, spending with a mentor to get a lot of value out of it. You could spend an hour a week and you would have
my mentor he's been CEO of a couple companies, and C-level for 20 years probably. And he doesn't do cybersecurity, but I was looking at taking a startup job, at a company. They were Series A, early on. I sat down with him and he's like, well, you're going to want to ask for their cap sheet, and you're going to want to do this. And I'm like, I don't know what these words are. I'm glad I called you. Right. And it wasn't our scheduled time. It was like, hey, do you have a minute to chat? And he made a minute. And so, but you're right. It doesn't take a lot of time. Right. And he didn't explain everything to me in that hour. Right. It wasn't like a training session, but he gave me the threads I needed to pull to go learn myself. Right. He showed me where the path was in the forest. I had to go walk it, but at least I knew where it was. Right. And so, I think, it doesn't take a lot of time. You get tremendous value. And I think the important thing though is to say, well, what path am I trying to walk? And what is it? And if you're a young professional that's trying to break into the industry, find somebody that looks like they've walked that path. And someone on LinkedIn or whatever, find somebody that doesn't have 20,000 followers. And send them a message, send them a connect. You're probably going to get less, like, I think it would be hard for anybody to get Jason Revolts as their mentor, because, he's got 20,000 things. He's an influencer. He's busy. Right. And I can't even imagine what his inbox looks like. Right. But if somebody wanted to get the director of DFIR at some mid-level company somewhere, that person would probably answer the message. And if somebody said, hey, I'm trying to break in, I was wondering if you had some time to sit down and talk, because I'm looking to figure out how to do it. I've connected a lot of people to mentors. Women who are like, do you know any women that have succeeded that I can talk to about how to navigate this as a woman? Right. Sure. Yeah. Let me get you in touch with somebody. Right. I can point you in a direction. Here's a list of 5 people you could reach out to. So there's a lot of, people can take their own responsibility if they're looking for ways. But I think, getting a larger pool of mentors is good too. And so, but I don't think people should just assume people don't want to be mentors, right? I think people will take an hour of their time to talk to you. If you're looking for it, you just have to ask.
Yeah, and I think it's a numbers game too. It's like I always say about recruiting. I say the same thing about job seeking. It's a numbers game. If you haven't succeeded yet, it's just because you haven't done enough yet. And on a long enough timeline and with enough effort, you will eventually attain whatever goal it is that you're working towards. You got to stay persistent. I think a lot of people underestimate the amount of effort sometimes it takes to get what you want. If you want to find a mentor, it may take reaching out to 100 people before you get 2 or 3 people to respond. So my advice is always just stick with it, and eventually it will pay off. As tedious sometimes as it can be, but yeah.
Well, I think I'd almost argue. I bet it would take that. I bet it would take that. Now, depending on who you're trying to message, right? Like if I'm like, well, I want to be mentored by Lex Friedman, right? Like, or Gary Sinise or somebody like a famous person. Yeah. But if you're trying to find somebody who can get you to the next level and you're just looking 2 levels up, especially for entry level people, it'd probably take 10 messages. I bet they'd get it in the first 5. So, but that person has to be active on LinkedIn. I think that's the other problem is a lot of more junior people don't necessarily see the value of LinkedIn. And a lot of mid-level people don't see the value of LinkedIn. And once people have a job, maybe they put LinkedIn away until they need another one. So, finding those people sometimes might be difficult. You might have to hit their little contact about thing and find their email and shoot them an email. Because they might not ever see their LinkedIn message. Right. I got one the other day from somebody who's like, "Oh, I haven't logged in 7 months. I'm sorry, I didn't see your message." Right. So, being persistent, reaching out to people in multiple platforms, and just asking the question. The worst that somebody's going to say is no, or you don't hear back. Right. Like, okay. Oh, right. They don't think less of you for asking. They're probably like, "Oh, I like that guy's attitude. I just don't have time. I like that girl's attitude. I just don't have time." Right. You're not going to be seen as negative for looking for a mentor. So, but anyway, that's a soapbox that, again, we could probably go all the way down, the whole rabbit hole of all these things in a whole podcast series. But, I think touching on them, getting people thinking about them, I think is super important. And I'm glad you're doing it. It's been a good conversation.
Paul. Yeah, that's a great place to wrap up. We'll certainly appreciate you being on, and hopefully we do this again here pretty soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, again, thank you for hosting. I think you do a great job, and I hope everyone's getting as much out of this as I have. So you have a great day.
All right, thanks, Paul. See you guys later.